answer sheet, we have Matthew, nigh to Jerusalem, Mark, nigh to Jerusalem, Luke, ascending to Jerusalem, and John, 6 days before the feast of the Passover. You can see that the donkey, and the donkey do not align. This is where they align, where Jesus says, by what authority was John's baptism, of heaven or men? By what authority? And by what authority? We all know that it's after 2 days. He says it's going to be the feast of the Passover. Jesus said in red, after 2 days is the feast of the Passover. This is not in Jesus' red, but it is still a synopsis of what he said. After 2 days is the feast of the Passover and of unleavened bread. And Luke just says that it was drew nigh, which is called the feast of unleavened bread, the Passover. We know that's the 7th, because 2 days later is the 10th. Remember, you have to choose your lamb on the 10th. 6 days before the 14th, the Passover, that's sacrifice. Okay, this is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You can call it the Feast of the Passover, but it's really called the Feast of the Passover, the Feast of the Passover and Unleavened Bread. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover. But notice the capital P. This small p means sacrifice. This is 6 days before the 14th. This is the 8th. And how do we know that? Because they're at Lazarus's, at a supper, and somebody oils her feet. But then Judas says we could have sold it for 300 pence. But that is on a different day, because these three guys all record that he was at Bethany at Simon the leper's when Judas said it. At Simon the leper's when Judas said it. At Simon the leper's when Judas said it. And here when Judas said it. We know it was the next day. Why? For the same reason as this. When he said this, now the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples said, where should we go to prepare the Passover? This is what you do on the 10th. You go choose a lamb. Again, here, we know this is the next day because now the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, they said, hey, where should we go to prepare the Passover? The same with this guy here. We know that's the next day because then came the day of unleavened bread when the Passover must be killed. No, you don't kill the Passover that day. They're saying you choose it on the 10th. You keep as commanded. You keep it up for 4 days, 5 days, inspecting it, and kill it on the 14th. And don't forget, when Judas said, and we all know Judas said, we all know that's the next day. And look at this next day. On the next day, knowing that his hour was come. Before the feast of the Passover. Just before. So guess what happened? That's the day you pick your lamb. And then we have the Last Supper. The Last Supper. The Last Supper. And in the evening. And when his hour was come, we know that that's in the evening, if this is the same event. His hour, and even in Matthew, the Last Supper, and when evening was come. So here's your answer sheet on a 2,000-year-old puzzle we didn't even know. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have a triumphal entry into Bethany on the 3rd, and then, because these guys read the exact same words for 10 verses, and then they diverge right here. Mark 11:11 says, and then Jesus entered into Jerusalem when he had looked around upon all things, and then when eventime was come, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Completely another day. And guess what? A triumphal entry into Bethany. And look at verse 21. Look at the first couple verses. Then Jesus drew nigh unto Jerusalem, had already been to Bethphage, then at the Mount of Olives sent 2 disciples to go to Bethany. If we know this is the day, and this happened that same day, then we can divide it up. Even now at the descent of the Mount of Olives, this is not his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Okay, here they put the donkey, and then it says even now at the descent. You think this would be the same thing. Luke, being the only guy to record things chronologically, says things very, very fast. And if we don't have the other guys to align it up, we're not going to see what happened on that day. So what happened here? How do we know it's the 3rd? That's a Sabbath. The 10th is a Sabbath. This Mark and Luke record one wild donkey, a donkey that has never been rid. You can ride on the Sabbath. This being another day, we have the Bethany, but then he goes into Jerusalem and speaks. And then I think here, yes, he walks by the fig tree and curses it. And Matthew says immediately it withered. Okay, but we learn in Mark that it took an entire day. On the morrow they walked by the fig tree, he cursed it. Okay, and when even was come, he went out of the city. And in the morning, this is a different day, in the morning, he saw it was dried up by the roots. You'll notice it was a leaves curse here. It withered, but then it says here, and when the disciples saw it, and they said, oh, look, it's dried up by the roots, that was a different day. This is when we find out it was a different day. And also, yes, so it aligns with the what authority. Okay, so the only thing we have here is even now at the descent. Okay, he's been to Bethany, triumphal entry. Maybe took the donkey to Jerusalem. He very could have walked to Jerusalem right across the Kidron Valley Bridge or the southern steps. But even now at the descent, and then it says, and when he got near to Jerusalem, he wept. He was weeping before he goes into Jerusalem. So that explains why they say to him that who is this? And all the crowd was moved, saying, who is this? He says, this is the prophet. I wrote it over here, but the text is actually here. This is the prophet, the promised prophet of Deuteronomy 13. This is the prophet of Galilee, of Nazareth. So we can see that a perfect chronology for the Passion Week has been set up, and the Last Supper ends with the 11th of the Aviv. The day you're supposed to choose the lamb, that night they had a Last Supper on the 11th, and Judas noticed there was no lamb. Our Passover lamb did not choose a lamb, so he thought he was a false prophet and went to turn him in. I hope this helps. I hope you can see all these little things. I know it sounds complicated just looking at it, but don't forget, if you put them all line by line, you'll notice there's no skipping. 1 to 7, 8, 9, 21, 22, all the way down. Okay, it's not like this is put over here. You know, it's not like this is put up here. This is all 1 to 10, 11, 12 to 19. It all goes chronologically right down the line. There's not a missing, and it's all one right after the other. To say, oh, the gospel authors' accounts were all different witness accounts, so maybe one guy will say 2 donkeys, and this guy says 1 donkey, and this guy, so maybe there's different witnesses' accounts. No, let's put a little trust into the gospel authors' writings, and they do. It now appears, we now know, instead of having a common Q source, we have a common Holy Spirit author.